Hey, how are we doing?
Doing good.
We go?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Honorable Minister, it's over to you.
Thank you very much, South Africa and the media, in the midst of dealing with a very difficult matter before our nation and the global nations across the world. We are here once more at the airports. At the airport in South Africa, OR Tambo. I'm with ATNS, which is air traffic navigation in South Africa, led by the acting CEO, Mr. Khokolo. And then on the far left is Poppy Koza, leading SACA, South African Civil Aviation, here in South Africa, and she's the CEO there. And then we have AXA on my left, which is the CEO of AXA, Mpumi Mpofu. And on the right, I'm with the COO, Chief Operations Fundi Sitebe, which is the CEO of AXA here at the airport. This brief is about information. First, in terms of clarity on the implementation of the restrictions on the movement of air travel regulations 2020, which have been published and gazetted. It is important that when we implement these regulations and its implications on implementation, we've got utmost clarity, particularly from those who are traveling and those who are still stuck somewhere, who don't understand what this mean. And this have got also an impact in terms of our relations with other countries and diplomatic relations and all of that. But we have arrived at this decision of the ban in terms of restrictions on the movement of people, particularly from those countries that have been flagged by the World Health Organization. These regulations for a ban of passenger air travel from the countries deemed high risk, as per the President's declaration, in terms of the national disaster, are now being implemented. Again, once more to repeat, those countries is South Korea, Italy, Spain, Iran, Germany, United States of America, United Kingdom, China, and France. Now, my colleagues around the table will further explain what in practical implementation does this mean. Because the expectation of somebody who's sitting at home is that China airline will not come here. In terms of the travel ban, and in particular restrictions on human movement from these particular countries, it means that the warm bodies will not be allowed. And therefore, the travel ban in terms of the airline itself, it is not actually imposed. And South Africans can therefore, those who come from those countries will also disembark. We'll explain that in detail, what it means in terms of the experience of this, because to some it means that these countries, in terms of their airlines, will actually not come. And yet, in terms of the regulations, what we're talking about is that travel restrictions on people who come from those countries. They will not be allowed. People coming from China, South Korea, and so on will not be allowed to disembark in the Republic. And should the need arise that we come to a conclusion that there is a need for a total ban, meaning you don't have to leave your country to come here under any other circumstance, we'll announce that in terms of the regulations. But the regulations mean you can get into an airline coming from Italy, you come here, you will not be allowed to disembark. But South Africans who come from those countries and who come back home through those airlines will be allowed to disembark and will be processed in accordance to the rules we have established here at the airport in terms of dealing with coronavirus. And we'll explain that. In terms of the travel restrictions, the following measures are now implemented. 1. Should an airline from a high-risk country land in South Africa, ATNS, which is Khokolo on my left, together with the airports company South Africa, will follow the process that they have in place, where the aircraft will be redirected to a remote parking and the relevant authorities will be notified. And then 2, foreign nationals from high-risk countries will not be allowed to disembark the aircraft and will return to the country of origin. That is what is happening. 3, South African citizens returning from high-risk countries are attended to by the Department of Home Affairs for Immigration Services and Port Health Service for screening and clinical assessment and quarantine. So that is what we do. You come from a high-risk country, you are processed. By immigration, afterwards, you undergo screening and all of that, and assessment, and for a possible quarantine, depending on your status, as and when you have been screened at that particular time. 4, all charter operators for the duration of this regulation will operate in the international airports that have the port health capacity for screening and further assessments. Since this morning, AXA has 3 international airports, being OR Tambo, Cape Town and Kinshasa, and have received a total of 20 aircrafts from high-risk countries, and the process as per regulation was followed. These aircrafts arrived here today because by the time the regulation was implemented and the NOTAM was issued, they were already airborne or ready to take off from the country of origin. One of those that arrived was Air China, which arrived at OR Tambo International Airport at about 8:37 a.m. from Shenzhen, and it was also subjected to the travel restrictions as detailed in the International Air Services COVID-19 restrictions on the movement of air travel, Regulations 2020 that I issued. 1. Air China, being an airline classified as arriving from a high-risk country, was redirected to a remote parking apron by ATNS and the airports company and relevant authorities who implemented various protocols. 2. The 68 Chinese nationals were not allowed to disembark the aircraft. 3. The inbound crew was screened and are in self-quarantine. On this flight, there were 80 South African nationals. Among them, students who were screened by Port Health and processed back into the country by the Department of Home Affairs Immigration Services, prior to them being transported from the tarmac to a facility where the Provincial Communicable Disease Control Division, CDC, is conducting clinical assessments that will inform applicable quarantine measures. We'll explain that in detail in terms of what has actually applied. All personnel involved in this process are equipped with the required protective gear as prescribed by the World Health Organizations. Passengers are encouraged to contact their airlines for details related to their specific flights. The following airports company South Africa Airport will manage scheduled flights from high-risk countries: OR Tambo, Cape Town, International and Kinshasa. Since the travel ban announcements, some airlines have already started cancelling their scheduled flights and have notified the affected passengers accordingly, and we're expecting more airlines to cancel as most countries are implementing similar law, and the order regarding travel ban has been. Passengers are encouraged to contact their airlines for details related to their specific flights. I want to dismiss the false information going around that the airports are closed or closing. No airport is closing. All operations are normal. And in this particular instance, should a decision be arrived at to close down or use the word shut down, total shutdown, close of the airport like other countries, that decision will come from the National Command Center. That is chaired by the President. At the present moment, there is no such decision. There are regulations that are being implemented that impose a travel ban on citizens from the mentioned countries not to come to South Africa. We allow them to embark back home, but we don't allow them to come in. That's what is actually happening. The only people allowed to come back home, because constitutionally, we've got no right to stop South Africans from coming back home. That is only South Africans. Should the need arise that we upgrade our regulations to ban airlines to come to South Africa, you will be updated about that. But our brief and our mandate from the command center is for travel ban, which many countries have, and South Africa is listed among the countries that have imposed a travel ban on citizens from these countries not to come here. So there's nobody, since the application of these resolutions, as of today, in particular the example being China, whose citizens have been allowed to pass here in this airport. That is what we are actually explaining. And for issues, you can the CEO of Airports Company will clarify that particular point. And we know that some of the citizens from China were saying to us that they are in transit to Mozambique and Namibia. But those airports are shut down. There are no airlines that are allowed to come into Namibia or Mozambique. So we send them back to China. So the crew, in terms of our regulations, are allowed to disembark, which is inbound, but at the same time quarantined. And they will be sent back together with the passengers as they go back to their different countries. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Honourable Minister. Perhaps, colleagues, let's allow for the CEOs and heads of entities just to elaborate and perhaps provide a little bit more clarity with regards to the statement that the Minister has read. We're going to start with the Access CEO. I'm going to try and creep in here and move the microphones. My colleagues are not here to assist. There we go. CEO, it's over to you.
Thank you. Minister, CEOs, colleagues, good afternoon. The Minister has given a comprehensive report about the status quo of the implementation of the regulations at the various airports, confirming that there have been 20 flights today, and importantly, those flights have included South African Airways from London Heathrow, British Airways, Air China, Virgin Atlantic, Lufthansa, Air France, Kulula, and SAA at OR Tambo. In Cape Town, today we had 5 flights that included Lufthansa, British Airways, and 3 flights from British Airways. In King Shaka, we had 1 flight that landed from London this morning. Important to note is that we are working at the various airports in collaboration with the other state agencies and departments, including the Department of Home Affairs, Port Health, the Department of Health, and we are coordinating our activities to actually manage the passage of passengers that come from these areas that are qualified as high risk. The first step is for Port Health and Department of Home Affairs to go onto the flight and screen people who are on that flight and determine whether you have South African citizens or not. The second step is, once there is a determination that there are South African citizens, we've allowed for buses to be taken to the airside where the South Africans are screened, swab tested, and basically put on those buses and ferried to a center for quarantine purposes. The non-South African citizens, like we had in the Air China this morning as indicated, basically were on transit to countries where unfortunately their journeys could not continue. because the airports in those countries had been closed. They returned and were basically not disembarked and returned on their flights to China. Important also to note is that in the collaborating exercise we've established a mechanism for coordinating our activities. SAPS is an additional partner and others. So as soon as we have an aircraft which is being diverted to a remote apron for the purposes of screening, the law enforcement agencies of this country actually assist, come with us, and are able to manage that particular process and ensure that the South Africans are properly escorted to the quarantine facilities. At the quarantine facilities, they undertake the detailed process that is required of them, and nobody escapes those processes until those processes have been finalized. As we proceed with this process, we continue to monitor our activities. We are quite clear about the flights that are scheduled, and we must indicate the countries that are listed at high risk are only part of the business of airports. There are countries that are not listed as high-risk countries, and we continue to receive different aircrafts and airlines from those various countries. Over the next few days, we will monitor the situation, and as the Minister indicated, this is a situation that requires us to respond and react to whatever challenges confront us as we move along. We may get to a point at which we want to enhance our measures on the basis of what is likely to transpire over the next few days. But at AXA, we're quite satisfied with the collaboration with our partners, the various departments, and we've really been working well together in managing what really today has been the first effective day of the implementation after the NOTAM was sent, received, and duly accepted by those that were going to be affected by it.
What is a NOTAM?
In the legal instruments that we have, the first important legal instrument is the Act which prescribes the state of disaster. Out of the Act, it is subordinated by a regulation that was initially issued by COCTA, which indicated the Department of Cooperative Governance, which is responsible for disaster, which indicated that other departments will issue their own regulations. The regulation was then issued by the Minister of Transport, which covers the civil aviation activities, which basically governs the work that we're doing now. The South African Civil Aviation Authority is then required on the basis of the regulation to issue a further legal instrument notifying the various role players, and particularly the countries and airlines, of the implications of the regulation and its implementation in South Africa. And that NOTAM was issued subsequent to the regulations, and we are all satisfied that all parties received it and they were able to respond to it and actually implement in accordance with it.
Thank you so much, CEO. Perhaps we can take it to Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much.
And that is the CEO of ATNS, Mr. Hopolo, who is going to also just elaborate further on what the Minister has had to say.
Thank you, and good afternoon, colleagues. Normally, as ATNS, our process starts when a flight plan is normally filed with our offices. And to date, as per the regulations, we have not been rejecting any flight plans. And the importance of a flight plan, it generally contains information about the aircraft itself, the area where it comes from, and obviously the number of passengers. But we generally don't focus on the details of the passengers, because our responsibility is to ensure that the aircraft land safely in our airspace and in our airports as well. And we want to confirm to date from our side, we have not rejected any aircrafts coming through to our airspace and to our country. And we don't intend to do so, as we are in compliance with the current regulations that are applicable. And also important that we've heard that there were planes that were grounded today We want to say from our side, we have not grounded any planes. We are still operating as normal and in compliance with the regulations that are currently in implementation. As the Minister has already indicated, really, is that our responsibility is to make sure that the aircraft lands safely. And if the aircraft is from a high-risk area, it is then important, as per protocol, to make sure that put it at a designated apron, so that then the AXA colleagues can then come in and then be able to follow protocol as it has already been outlined by the Minister. I'm not going to repeat that. But generally our role is to make sure that all these planes are well meant for in our airspace and make sure from a safety point of view we don't compromise that. And as the Minister has already indicated, should there be any changes going forward, we will be able to adjust our operations in line with any amendments as requested by the government. And I think that's all from us as ATNS, just to confirm that we continue to operate as normal.
Thank you so much. I will do the honors. Thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, the CEO of SACA, Ms. Poppy Khoza.
Thank you very much, Ayanda. I think ours is very simple. The Minister has pretty much covered the issue of the regulations, and our responsibility really comes in to enforce the regulations. And I must indicate that the regulations are being enforced accordingly, and we shall continue to enforce the regulations as it were. So I think our role really ends there. I can also add that over and above that, we have collaborated with our sister agencies, Airports Company South Africa and ATNS, in terms of providing training to our airline as well as airport staff. So ongoing training is continuing around the issues of hygiene control, proper wearing of personal protective, as well as the disinfection issues. So that we shall continue to ramp up as situation changes from time to time, as well as to ensure, by and large, that we implement the regulations in a manner that is consistent with its intention. Thank you very much.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, the floor is yours. Any questions?
Heidi Jockas from ENCA. If I can just ask the AXA CEO to just repeat the flights. You went a bit too fast. And then secondly, Minister, maybe if you can give an indication of, for example, flights coming in that are connecting. So, for example, Emirates or Qatar. A lot of those people are connecting flights, whether those passengers aren't disembarking, there are possibly South Africans in there. So what is the plan around the connection flights? And then just the last question, isn't it perhaps a big risk to allow flights to be coming in, even though the regulation was perhaps only implemented today? Now all those people that were on those flights need to be quarantined and checked and so forth. Isn't there a risk of the virus spreading even more when you're allowing these planes to come in, even though you're not allowing foreigners to disembark? I don't know if I'm clear, but
Yeah, you are very clear.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Any other questions?
Very clear than the Zondo Commission. No, not the Zondo. Before the Zondo Commission. Tomorrow they're going to say Mbalula is taking Zondo. Okay, all right.
Okay, I think we're okay for this round. Perhaps you can answer CEO Maskalenga.
Yes, thank
Thank
you.
you.
The flights that landed today, as we indicated, at OR Tambo were 14 this morning. 1 from King Shaka and 5 at Cape Town International Airport. I will group them because some of the airlines have more than one flight arriving in the morning. London Heathrow included South African Airways and British Airways. Then we had Air China and Virgin Atlantic, Lufthansa, and British Airways, Air France, and Alitalia, In Cape Town, we had Lufthansa, British Airways. There are 3 British Airways flights and 2 Lufthansa flights. King Shaka, we had 1, which was British Airways. Yes, that's the flight, the details of the flight. We can give you the number of passengers and all of that, but
Connecting flights.
the issue relating to connecting flights is, you must remember that the regulation specifically refers to World Health Organization listed high-risk countries. So by definition, we are not allowed to act on foreign passengers that are not coming from those high-risk areas. In the instances that we are dealing with is with the airlines that are coming from those high-risk areas. This is the schedule for this morning. There are passengers that are basically coming in and traveling to other areas, but this number is reducing significantly because in the region at least, a number of airports are shutting down. The second problem we're experiencing is that the connecting flights are totally full, so they are not able to do that. In instances where we've had passengers that are coming through who had originally had an intention to connect, such as the case in Air China, they have returned back to China simply because there was no correct connecting destination which was going to be possible for them. Originally, they thought they were transiting, but upon arrival, they were told that those particular in one instance, there were no airlines or seats available from them to connect, and in the second instance, in Namibia specifically, the airport was shut. So by definition, they couldn't proceed, and therefore they returned. And that's how we're dealing with them. But the majority of other people who are not in the high-risk countries, they are continuing to fly into our airport, and they are continuing to travel to various destinations, including domestic destinations. Thank you.
We are a country that is prone to litigation, country with many rights, and you need to be aware of that. Some people will ask a question, why didn't you shut them? Last night in the maritime, I faced possible litigation. And then last night also I was threatened with a litigation by an airline, claiming that our regulations were acting not consistent with our regulations. For reasons that, one, you've got South Africans who are now international, who have been traveling for pleasure or for whatever reason, right? And then wherever they are caught up in the midst of this, they want to come back home. And then these airlines justify coming here despite the fact that we have put up a ban on their citizens. But their claim to come here is that we are bringing your people. Now, constitutionally, South Africa cannot allow its citizens, you cannot close the borders from your citizens from coming home. Now, what does it mean? It means that as the minister, I must now ban these airlines from coming here. That will affect South African citizens. But if I take that decision, we must equally decide what we do with our people. We must fetch them and evacuate them, like we did with Wuhan. Now, that is the decisions that are before the command center. And that is what we are faced. Now, the regulations have been implemented, and it may require that we upgrade the regulations to ensure that there is a total ban. That includes travel ban, restriction, but at the same time, airlines departing from the countries, of origin to come to South Africa. So you've got those particular cases, and which largely is about the justification to come here because we are taking your people back home. But those, in terms of the travel ban, as it is stated, they are not allowed even to disembark. The cases we are dealing with in the back room is South Africans. 80 of them from the China airline that came this morning. And they are now being examined according to the protocols in terms of ensuring that they are quarantined, and whatever that the Department of Health need to do has got to do. So the operation is in full force. And should the need arise that we ban them totally, we will do that, and we will keep you informed. But we need to clarify this point that we are allowing people to come here irrespective of the ban. The ban does not say airlines cannot come to South Africa. They are allowed to come in terms of the ban, but it is restricting citizens from those countries. Even if you can leave US being an American and come via Dubai to South Africa, we'll find you here. You will not be allowed to enter the country. So there is no such. So the only people we are dealing with is South Africans who go through immigration, and after immigration they are processed through our health authorities and follow the processes of being quarantined and being checked. Now, before the regulations, you will have a situation where people will have been checked and allowed to go in. That has stopped because the regulations are now in full force. Remember, we told you that the regulations after the ban, the president said 18th of March. 18th of March was Wednesday. So they've now been operationalized as we speak and implemented. And should the command center arrive at a decision that we need to move in a different direction, we'll do so. But equally ourselves, when we take a decision that it's a total ban, we must equally take a decision about our people who are in those countries and who are now wanting to come back home. So this is what we are basically faced with, partly which we need to divulge as a challenge that is facing us, and we've got to assist our citizens to come back home in South Africa like we have done with Wuhan and all of that, to come back, because constitutionally we can't disallow our people when they want to come back. But at some point, when decisions of that nature are taken, will be actually taken. But I think for the first days of this operation, we are very happy and congratulate the staff and everybody at the operational center. And I think everyone have been doing a marvelous job in terms of putting the interest of South Africa first. And at the same time, applying the rules and ensuring that the rules are actually being implemented in this airport. I think we want to congratulate our officials who are doing this job, and a very delicate job and a very important job for the country, because at the end it is about preservation of our country's interest, and that is what is important. It's not about nationalities, it's about South Africa. And nobody planned this journey that somewhere, somehow we will be caught up in a coronavirus somewhere in the US. That is it. We've got citizens of the country who are somewhere in the sea in France, and who are crying for the president to intervene. They want to come back home. But those countries have closed them out. So those are things we are addressing. It's a big challenge. It's not an easy matter. And this thing says to us, stop unnecessary movement. We may want to come to domestic and even reduce airlines, but we have not arrived at that. This traveling must be stopped at some point. Unnecessary traveling, moving from Soweto to your friend in Hillbrow every day must stop. And then moving to my friend every day to Polokwane must stop. Stay where you are and socialize in your surrounding. And that is what this is about, because there's no other way. We've got to lessen the movement and the numbers. And that is what we need to do. And I was very happy when I got to British Airways and traveling to Cape Town, the numbers were low. And it affects the airline's revenue. It affects us all around. I mean, our people in the trains, we've got regulations we are looking at now in terms of the trains, in terms of public transport, land transport. We are addressing that. So by Monday, Tuesday, we'll have to enforce regulations in that sphere to say, how are we going to manage our lives in terms of our daily commute in those particular areas? So we've got to move faster and with determination. And because this virus is not stopping, it's increasing, and The Department of Health is doing a marvelous job, and all what we do is to complement that particular work based on the instructions the President has given. Any further instruction we are given, will act. And like it has been said, there are many other options, but I think everybody has been responding very well, and other people are affected, but we are equally emphasizing to those countries and those citizens, don't come to South Africa, we will not come to you. And that's what this ban is about. So we don't want to be dealing with the Chinese community here that is pleading to come in to South Africa, when the travel ban is very clear. They don't have to come to South Africa. And when the situation has normalized, we are global, we are in solidarity. And we thank everyone who has acted in a manner in which they do. And we've tried our level best to facilitate, including in the deep seas of Cape Town, in the Western Cape, where we have had people stuck in the sea. We did not allow them to disembark. We had to test them. Germany is sending jets to come and fetch them. Fantastic job that we are doing in collaboration with those countries. OR Tambo is no exception. And there will be no balls dropped here in terms of the work that we are doing. So regulations will be in full force. If in the next 2 days regulations are upgraded to another level, Ayanda will tell you, and the rest of the airport people. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Minister. Colleagues, are we answered? Mbadi, you have a question. The Minister has partially answered it, but I think you have a follow-up to what he's had to say.
Actually, Minister Mbalula Mthetho from ABC, and my question is about the German chartered flights that are making their way to South Africa. And the question is, I don't know if you've actually answered this question, but what regulations apply to chartered flights?
Like we chartered SAA and went to fetch our people in Wuhan. That's what Germany is doing. We've got German citizens who came here, and then 6 of them were suspected to be infected. They've been tested, they are negative, but we did not allow them to disembark because our regulations say so. So they have to go back to Germany. So they sent their aircraft in South Africa, and then they will be sent back.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, I think it's fair for us to conclude. Boss, I don't know if you have a parting shot? No.
Unless colleagues think I've not covered them, but I think this suffices to clarify the matters.
Sorry, I just want to clarify something. I'm sorry. Those South African citizens that arrived today, are they going to be quarantined? Like, are they going to go home and self-isolate for 14 days? Or is there a process for the department to provide a facility for them to quarantine?
Well, I won't answer that question, but the procedure is that they are now in a quarantine section. Not at the airport, in a place that is isolated.
Okay.
Yeah, they are there, and the Department of Health is in charge. And it's not just boom going home from China. It's not going to be. So they will be there. They will be quarantined. Any development with regard to their state and what happens to them, Department of Health will clarify you. We have done what we needed to do. We take South Africans, we give them in the hands of the Department of Health. Department of Health will quarantine those people and decide what actually happened. And then decide in terms of the clinical work they do on them, what they need to do in terms of the proper protocols. Our job here is to ensure that the rule says South Africans come in, those who come from outside are not allowed, and if South Africans have come in from high-risk areas, we take them to a facility of health for them to be quarantined.
Thank you so much, Minister. Sorted. Thank you so much. Colleagues, I've already sent you soft copies of the statement. For any more information, say please here. I'm also here. Thank you very much, Minister, CEO, COO. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Minister.
All right. Yes, no delay.
Thank you.
Now we have
Thank you.
clarified because
Yes, no, it's clear.
because land of Utinos in Mandela, we are what's the name?